94 WYSP, the rock you grew up with, and AC/DC. That is certainly some of the stuff you grew up with, and some of the stuff that Andy Bloom helped start playing here at YSP when he came here in 1985. Is that what we, May 13th, 1985. The day that Mayor Good dropped the bomb on Move, the incendiary device, and the rest became history here at YSP. Now, I didn't mean this to be an Ask Andy program, by the way, during the break, sir.
That's all right.
Okay.
That's all right. There's hard questions, and I'll tell you what, before we hit 8 o'clock, I'll try to answer the questions that I know that everybody wants to know the answer to. So we'll save that for just before 8 o'clock.
Okay. Some legendary folks that you brought in here. Now, there was a thing called the Labor Day Massacre.
That's how Gail Schuster referred to it for as long as she wrote for the Inquirer.
Yeah.
And so we had what I'll call the false start, where we had a group of disc jockeys that somehow you were included in, but the rest of them had names like Scruff, Animal, and Killer. And that lasted for several months, and it was pretty quick that we knew that wasn't gonna go particularly well. And it was tough to make it in after you've had a night out with these guys. It was, and most of us at that time would not be able to pass the CBS policies, employment policies now. But we survived.
Excuse the way I'm going to put this, but we'd all be peeing neon.
So we'll move on, and we'll say that we retrenched and we regrouped starting in late 1985 and made our way for another day that will live in infamy, one that I'm much more excited to talk about, and that is August 18th, 1986.
Yeah.
On that day, something that we had been working on since late 1985 happened. That was the debut of Howard Stern All Morning and Classic Rock All Day. And again, you survived. You're kind of like a cockroach. I'm seeing a theme here, Randy.
I've been called that before. It's okay. Will I survive this?
And you know, I have faith that you'll survive. You're a good guy with a lot of talent. And I have faith that you'll survive.
Thank you, Andy.
But August 18th, 1986 was really what ushered in the era of good fillings at WYSP and ushered in what really was a 20-year run. While the station evolved and changed a lot over those 20 years, it was an incredible run. We all know the story, what happened with Howard. Howard eventually, over the course of about 3 years, became number one in the city. Next thing that happened was WYSP became the flagship station for the Philadelphia Eagles, and eventually WYSP became not only the number one rock station, but the number one station in all of Philadelphia. And while the station again evolved and went from classic rock to a more rock position that included playing current music, and some of the people came and went, including myself. I went to Los Angeles in 1991, and a good friend of mine, Tim Sabian, also from Minneapolis, another Minneapolis native, came in to replace me and program from 1991 through 2006. It was a great era for WYSP, and the station maintained its dominance as the rock station, and even its dominance as the overall leader in the market for a good chunk of that period of time. And that really was what I think we should call the heyday for WYSP.
Yeah, no, you're definitely right.
Trying to not choke up, and some of this is really hard when I think about it.
Yeah, but I know this is your baby. This is very close to me as well, as you know. How did the Howard thing come about? I mean, he started the Howard Stern Network. Really was started here. It was New York, then here, then I guess D.C.
Yeah, it was Howard had been hired in November 1985 to do afternoons at K-Rock in New York. And Ken Stevens, the general manager, and I do have a list of thank yous, and both Howard and Ken are on my list of people that I have to thank before we finish up here.
Okay.
But it was kind of a chance meeting. We had to go up to New York, and I had to look the CEO of the company in the face and tell him that the thing that we had launched on Labor Day by November, I had a pretty good idea wasn't going to be successful, and had to tell him, which the general manager did not want me to do, and so I had to kind of bite my lip a little bit as a 24-year-old program director. hoping that I would, survive whatever was going to happen. And we came back from lunch, and I'd been very quiet. And this is really little known, but in Milwaukee, and this was before I'd worked at WIP-FM in Milwaukee, but for a brief period of time before I even worked there, when Ken Stevens was the vice president of programming for the company, had briefly, for a brief period of time, simulcast Morning Drive with the Loop in Chicago, and Steve Dahl had been its morning man. And I had suggested to Ken, maybe we could try that. Maybe we could put WYSP back on the map by trying that with Howard Stern, who had been getting some attention up in New York. And Ken said,
Steve Dahl, by the way, is the guy who used to blow up disco records.
Had been famous for the disco demolition at Comiskey Park in 1979.
Absolutely, yeah.
And Ken said, well, let's leave that for another day. And after lunch, we're in Mel's office, the CEO of Infinity Broadcasting at the time.
Mel Karmazin. Yeah.
And Howard walks by, and Mel says, Howard, come on in, meet the guys from Philadelphia. We get introduced, and Howard says, have you heard the show? And I said, I can't pick it up down in Philadelphia. This is pre-internet, so you couldn't just listen to a station online or anything like that. And I was honest. I'd said, I haven't heard it very much, but I've heard you compared to Steve Dahl. And if you're anything like Steve Dahl, boy, I wish we had you in Philadelphia. And Howard did what you think Howard would do. That MFer, he ripped me off. He stole everything. And on and on.
Right,
and I said, and I made an innocuous little comment that, maybe changed history. I said, well, maybe you could do what Steve Dahl never did. Be number one in Morning Drive in two places at the same time. And I swear to God, if there's ever a moment in time where you saw a light bulb go off over somebody's head.
Yeah.
And for the next, and this is the part where I had nothing to do with anything. That was in November. Between August and July, I knew something was happening, but I didn't know what. I didn't know if it was going to happen. We referred to it as Project X. So around the station, you probably heard me saying something to Ken, anything on Project X? And that was code for Howard Stern, and I didn't know anything. And one day at the end of July 1986, Ken comes into my office and says, Howard's going to be on Letterman tonight, and he may announce something.
Oh, man.
And I didn't even know that we had a deal done. And I don't know to this day if we had a deal done.
Yeah.
And Howard, and I said, well, Letterman tapes at 5. Surely we can find out if he says something between 5, and at that time Letterman was on after Johnny Carson at 1 o'clock. Surely we can find out. Or 12:30, not 1. And spent all day trying to find out, and could not find out a word. Nobody told us anything. So I was, had to stay up and watch Letterman. And Howard comes out, and I'll never forget it. Dave, I have a big announcement.
You do a good Howard, by the way. Dave.
Arms waving,
right.
With big hands. Our empire is growing. We're like a virus. We're growing. And our takeover of the world has begun. And he announced, when I get back from vacation in 2 weeks, we're going to debut 94 WYSP in Philadelphia. And I just remember getting up and unplugging the phone again. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have email. We didn't have Blackberries. Unplugging the phone, walking downstairs to the kitchen, opening the liquor cabinet, getting a bottle of something, just pouring a big glass of it and just chugging it down. And it's, now 1 o'clock in the morning, and just laid in bed and stared at the ceiling thinking,
here it starts.
What's going to happen now?
Yeah.
Because we didn't know.
It's uncharted territory.
Totally uncharted.
Yeah.
And I think I got in the next morning somewhere around 8 o'clock, and I'd already had 1,000 emails, voicemails, and a Morning Drive disc jockey, Scruff Connors, who was following me as I walked in, going, "What's going on? What's going on?"
Could you smell him?
And I had no answers. I had no answers for anything.
Right.
August 18th, 1986 happened, and it was like a nuclear bomb had gone off in the Philadelphia radio community. And while now everybody thinks it's obvious, and of course it worked, If you remember in 1986, they had written our obituary. So, I'm used to seeing radio obituaries getting written when stations do things that are uncharted territory or different. And we didn't know. And it was pretty scary. Those first 6 weeks, I was the complaint department. All I did was take complaints on the telephone and by letters and take petitions all day long. That was my full-time job. And the rest, as they say, is radio history.
It certainly is radio history.
We also, on that day, and it was one of the things that kind of gets lost in the shuffle, on that day, we also changed our format to classic rock, which was also part of changing things. We brought Ed Shockey, the late, great Ed Shockey. We brought him in within a couple weeks of that to do afternoons, and everything worked. From that point,
great staff that was.
It was a great staff, and from that point,
and to have Howard there at the and you doing your mornings. And what in terms of radio history, is that maybe the quickest rise, the most meteoric rise in terms of ratings in a market? You know numbers like that. You're one of those numbers guys.
I don't think so, because while Howard immediately had a huge impact, it really took 3 years for him to become number one. In 1991, I went out to Los Angeles, and we kind of did the whole thing over again, but taking all the lessons that we'd learned in Philadelphia and applying them to Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, Howard went from, nowhere to number one, and the whole thing happened in less than 18 months, happened in about 15 months. That was the meteoric rise. That was the unbelievable meteoric rise that I don't think any of us have ever seen before.
I think it took time for people to realize that Howard wasn't talking to kids.
Well, what had happened here was he got to number two. He'd gotten just behind DeBella within the first year. It took 2 more years for him to get that last inch and get over the top. That was the part that took the long time. But from almost immediately, it was neck and neck.
We're talking with Andy Bloom, operations manager of CBS Philadelphia. We got to play some. I was going to skip these commercials. Do I do that?
No, I think you better pay the bills.
I think I better do that, and we'll be right back.
Don't miss the 2011 Mile Year Wrap-Up.